With the spread of the Kyle Shanahan tree offenses around the NFL, our defense is getting better at defending those teams. And should the 49ers veer from what they've been doing in the past to make up for that? And Roger Craig, among other ex-49ers Hall of Fame semifinalists, coming up on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Eric_Crocker on Twitter, on Threads, on the Grams. Find us everywhere you find your podcasts, and leave us a comment on YouTube as well. Appreciate all the everydayers up there. Everydayers out there. Make sure you're subscribed up on YouTube and everywhere you get those podcasts. And Roger Craig, Hall of Fame semifinalist. We'll get to that a little bit later. He's not the only semifinalist, by the way. Old Elder Shanahan among them. Former 49ers coach George Seifert among them. But let's start with the Play Callers podcast that's out there from The Athletic. Jordan Rodriguez doing a fantastic job. We talked about some of the notes from the first couple of episodes yesterday. We teased at the end of yesterday's pod about the defensive side of the ball, and they have gone a lot more into the defensive side of the ball, talking Robert Saleh and some insight on how the defense has changed for Robert Saleh and what it was like with the 49ers when they showed up, and how things changed for Sean McVay and his defenses. And he went from Wade Phillips to Brandon Staley, and we heard from Brandon Staley in this podcast. So a lot of great insight, and it just matches up perfectly with what I asked to end yesterday's episode to you, Croc, which is, with so many Kyle Shanahan proteges out there and so many people coming from the same tree of offensive scheme in the wide zone, our defense is going to get better at defending those teams. And might we start to see teams going away from the Kyle Shanahan offense because defenses get so good at defending it?
It sounds like you don't have to go away from the offense. You just have to figure out how to fit your concepts into different looks and how you can attack defenses in a way where it really kind of destroys their rules. The really cool thing that I heard in there was defense at its core previously was you do this or this. And then they have learned to kind of tailor their thoughts to be able to warp to whatever offense that they're playing. And I said, that's very interesting. Yeah, the other interesting thing
was or this, it's this and this.
Right, there we go.
Every defensive coordinator, they use the word multiple, right? Everyone's a multiple because you have to be multiple.
The other thing was how cracking the code in these defenses aren't just randomly happening, and they also aren't happening because, we're watching film and we just know how to break it down. Even though there were some kind of sound bites of maybe seeing another team and what they did against them. And then it's like, okay, let's try to do that again. And that happened. There was a lot on that with McVay, but it's almost like they're kind of spies, right? These offensive guys, they go into these teams, they're the coordinator, and there's this defense that's really tough, and they just get to practice against that defense and throw everything they have at it until eventually, boom, they crack the code. And then that's what they utilize because everybody else is starting to adopt that style of defense. And then now, boom, Kyle Shanahan figured it out because he kept going up against it in practice, and he was determined to figure it out. He didn't even know. He said, so it's not a quarters defense? They're like, nah, man, it's a cover 3 defense. He didn't even know what he was looking at. But once he figured it out and he talked to them and he's sitting in those rooms and he starts looking, okay, and then he goes up against it and he tries different things and he starts to crack that code. And it happened there. And then it sounded like there's kind of this back and forth between the defense changing and then the offense having to change to that. It was really cool stuff if you haven't heard it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really intrigued by hearing McVay talk about the defense and Brandon Staley talking about their defense, because when Sean McVay's Rams with Jared Goff went to the Super Bowl, there was one team that season that gave him fits, and it was the Chicago Bears. And who was the defensive coordinator of the Chicago Bears at the time? It was Vic Fangio. So it was Vic Fangio's scheme, and he was the one that was kind of pioneering the cover 4 stuff at the time. And it really gave them fits. So what did the genius of Bill Belichick do when he was about to play the Los Angeles Rams in the Super Bowl? Well, he went back to the team that played them the best and said, well, guess what? We're going to do that to you in the Super Bowl. And guess what? They beat him in the Super Bowl, right? And so what's awesome about it is that Sean McVay is like, you know what? Let's play that defense too. So what did he do? He went and got the guy who was under Vic Fangio in Chicago, and that was Brandon Staley. And so he brought in Brandon Staley, young, smart guy, kind of running that cover 4 thing. And now that's the defense they're running, and that's the defense that they're trying to beat and get better at. And Jared Goff's getting crushed in practice because he's going against the defense that had the answers against their offense, right? But and so we're seeing so many teams around the league play the Shanahan, McVay, that whole style of wide zone on offense and a lot of motions and a lot of play action and bootlegs and all those things. And then on defense, we're seeing so many teams now run that Vic Fangio style of defense and a lot of cover 4. And then Robert Saleh talked about how was it the 49ers losing the Super Bowl, the very next Super Bowl in 2019? The Wasp play that beat the 49ers. That was a cover 3 beater, right?
So it was a cover 3 beater. Depending on who you talk to, because I've heard different things, they can kind of tell you different rules. But I know this, all right, just from a basic standpoint of cover 3. All right, in cover 3 as a cornerback, because it was Emmanuel Mosley who everybody gave a hard time to. As a cover 3 cornerback, you are a 2-to-1 read guy. All right. So what that means is if 2 is going up the seam, you have to be in position, if that's in your third, to be able to cover that and a vertical from the outside guy. So essentially, you kind of want to play like kind of cover 3 divide, where you're splitting the difference between the 2 guys. And if they're both pushing vertical, maybe shade a little bit closer to the 2 going up the seam, because the further throw is to the outside guy. All right. Now, you're reading him. Once 2 goes away, you can squeeze whatever 1 does, because now there's nobody else to threaten your third. So what happened in that play was Tyreek Hill and the number 1 receiver, Tyreek Hill was at 2 spot. They're both running vertical straight up the field, right? 2 goes away on a post. That was Tyreek Hill. 1 ran a dig. So now I can squeeze and help on that dig because 2 went away. Unfortunately,
2 came back.
Mahomes dropped back 20 yards, and Tyreek Hill had enough time to attack the single high safety, get him to open up and turn the other way, and then go back out. And that typically doesn't happen. You typically don't have enough time to do that. And you typically don't have a quarterback dropping back 20 yards and still throwing the ball another 60 yards or whatever the heck he did. So everything kind of came together perfectly for the Kansas City Chiefs. Mosley, they gave him a hard time for that. But I would say it's more on Jimmy Ward, because he's a safety and he opened up. Ideally, and this is different, I don't have Tyreek Hill who runs a 4 flat running at me. Ideally, if you're Ward, you would like to stay square and high in your pedal. So when he's running that post, I still have inside leverage. I can just run at the top, but I don't have to move now. And once he goes corner, I don't have to flip and turn. I'm just in the position to be able to plant and drive. So to me, that would have been the tweak. But again, I don't know what they were taught. I don't know what they told them in the meetings. I don't know if they said, hey, if you see Tyreek Hill in that slot and he's pushing vertical, no matter what, you just stay off in that third. But typically, that's not how you play. Typically, 2 goes away, you squeeze 1.
Mm-hmm. And it's such a rare play for a quarterback to have that much time, be able to make that throw, a wide receiver who's the fastest receiver in the league, to be able to push you that way and then come back to the corner. And Emmanuel Mosley had just made a big play. It was either earlier that game or I think it was the game before where Emmanuel Mosley did that. He squeezed to the inside and he made a big play. I think he might
cover 3 against the Green Bay Packers.
Yes.
2-to-1 read.
Yep.
1 did a stop route. 2 went up the seam and he jumped that seam route and got the interception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's where your eyes are. 2-to-1.
Right.
If 1 stops, the only person threatening your zone is 2 going up the seam, and he was able to get that. In this scenario, 2 went away, so now he can squeeze whatever 1 does. Unfortunately, 2 just came back out on the corner.
So they used his rules against him. So good job by the Kansas City Chiefs there. But Next, Croc, then what did the 49ers start doing more of and less of on defense after they lost the Super Bowl to someone who figured out how to beat what they were doing? Next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by our newest sponsor, eBay Motors. Super excited about this one. And our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed fits on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us in this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And Croc, yesterday we talked about Christian McCaffrey. He's a no doubt 1.1. I know every 49ers fan out there, when they've got the number one pick in their fantasy draft, is going to be taking Christian McCaffrey. But Croc, who do you think you would take if you didn't take a running back early in your fantasy draft? Who would you want?
Justin Jefferson.
Justin Jefferson. It's okay to get downright giddy about doing the gritty. That means picking Vikings wide receiver Justin Jefferson is a guaranteed fit. Get this, over the last 2 seasons, Jefferson led the league in both receptions and receiving yards and should remain absolutely dominant as a target monster for those Vikings and ignite your lineup going forward. Vinny Iyer, every single week, Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you find your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows the championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, tail lights, alternators, shocks, struts, fenders, you name it, eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car, because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time, which is key. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing. Because now you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go with eBay Guaranteed Fit. Everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. So we saw the Rams. They got beat in the Super Bowl by some very good defenders and a smart coordinator, and they realized that there was answers to what they were doing. So they tried to change what they were doing and tried to learn how to defeat that. 49ers, next year, they go into the Super Bowl. They get beat by an awesome quarterback and an awesome coordinator and an awesome offensive mind that figured out how to beat what they were doing. And so what did the 49ers defense start doing less of? Cover 3. What they start doing a lot more of? Cover 4, just like the Rams started doing, just like a lot of the teams in the league started doing, and just like a lot of teams around the league are doing, especially against the Kansas City Chiefs. And then, Croc, have you noticed recently what the Kansas City Chiefs have started to do with their offense? Because guess what? Everyone's playing cover 4 against them, trying to make Mahomes beat them underneath and trying to make them, hit them with just body blows and make them have 10, 12 play drives instead of the explosives, the haymakers, as Robert Saleh called them in the Playmakers or the Play Callers podcast. And I think it's just fascinating how the league goes and how innovation is how innovation happens in the league and how you learn how to beat something. So you got to change it and do this. And then this happens to that, and that happens to that. And how the Tampa 2 is kind of just the same as the cover 3, but instead of the middle linebacker dropping back into the middle of the field, that it's safety in the middle field as well. And then so now you got cover 4. So now teams know how to beat the cover 4. So what do teams do against the 49ers that are trying to figure out how to beat cover 4? Well, they rotate late. So while Jimmy Garoppolo's doing a play action and turns his back to the defense, what do? They bring down a robber safety because he knows that they're going to try to drop that dig in behind the second level. And Jimmy Garoppolo turns around, and what he thought was cover 4 is actually cover 3 with a robber, and he throws the ball to the defender and throws an interception. So, I mean, it's just awesome watching these minds go back and forth at each other, learning what to do to beat somebody, making it more difficult, making the picture muddier. And so now you got positionless offense against positionless defense. You got motions, you got late movement on the defensive side of the ball, late rotation. And I can't imagine how difficult it is to play quarterback this day and age in the NFL.
Have you watched, and there's a couple of things here, and I'll talk about with the cover 4. Actually, I'll start with the 49ers and what they started doing. at one time, I want to say maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, when Robert Saleh, right, Robert Saleh's last year, they started going a little bit more cover 4 heavy, especially on early downs. And the thought process behind that was to prevent those big, deep over crossers by having 2 safeties now. So in turn, what the 49ers wanted to do, and this is where we just recently talked about Eric Armstead playing 3 tech. This is where it comes in to play him playing on the end. They wanted bigger bodies on the defensive line to help against the run, so that it's not a D4 that has to set the edge. Let's put a big body out there like Eric Armstead. So instead of having in a cover 3, you'd have an extra guy in the box in a cover or any kind of 2 high quarters or cover 2 or whatever. Now you have 2 safes. So that's an extra guy out of the box. Now you're more vulnerable against the run. So they just want those big bodies on the edge, especially in early downs. And the 49ers went quarters heavy. Now, it's a little different kind of with Patrick Mahomes. Have you watched Quarterback, that show on Netflix?
I have not.
So I was watching it and I downloaded it so I can watch it on the flight. I fell asleep. I woke up and I see they're playing against the 49ers. And he throws that interception where Gibson jumps it and picks it off. I mean, he knocks it away, then Hufanga dives over and picks it off, right? That was like one of the first drives of the game. And Patrick Mahomes, it's so cool to kind of see because he's so confident in his ability. And he said, there's no way they're playing this like that. So not only are teams going to quarters to try to keep Patrick Mahomes, and you see his numbers, the air yards, him, whatever, check down, all that. That is more so than probably anybody in the league because teams are playing their safeties, even in the 2 high, extremely deep. So he has no choice but to throw underneath. But he wants to throw it deep. So he said, I can't believe, and he's saying this, you hear, I can't believe the 49ers are playing me like this right now. Their safeties are tight. They jumped that. I'm not expecting that because nobody plays us like that. So what he to say? We're going over the top now. I want to throw it over the top. Teams just play so deep, I can't. So what they do, boom. And this is where I talked about the other day, Travis Ward, that turn and run. Valdez Scantling got him deep. And that was, he was also, I want to make sure I say it. I think Ward was still kind of hurt, Travis Ward. But they got the 49ers deep. And the safeties were really tight. The jumping stuff underneath. That leaves your guy out there on an island that kind of struggles to turn and run in quarters and off coverage. And boom, Patrick Mahomes threw it over the top. So he's looking to throw it deep, but teams like 49ers and others have gone more to 2 high and make it tougher. But even more so for him than anyone, it affects him because they're not just playing 2 high and 12 yards, off the ball. They're playing deep too. So he's a little different. He might be a little bit of an outlier.
It's fascinating stuff. I love it. And I do love hearing those things from behind the scenes and hear what they're exactly saying. And I always think that when I'm watching the games, like, I wish I could know what these 2 guys are saying right now because I know that.
Do you know what quarterback is?
Do what?
Do you know what that is on Netflix? Have you heard about it?
Yeah, I've heard it's coming out. I think they did one recently about something else. Maybe last year was it other players, NFL players, or maybe it was a different sport, but a similar idea. And yeah, I'm super excited. It's Mahomes. Is it
Mariota and Cousins?
Yeah,
and it's interesting too because Cousins threw a pick, right? And I bet everybody on social media, the fans, the Vikings fan, oh man, he just threw this interception, terrible throw, right? So he throws this pick. He's throwing it to Justin Jefferson, and he goes over to Justin Jefferson, and he was like, you didn't like it, like we're coming here. He's like, don't worry about it. And you see Justin Jefferson tap his chest because he was supposed to flatten that route off, but he saw a body there. So instead of flattening it off, he kind of freelanced and went over the top where Cousins is like, no, like I want you here. So you just see him kind of go to him and talk. And to them, it's just an interception. All right, we'll adjust. To other people, oh, Cousins sucks. So that was just kind of just the interaction after an interception, how everybody's going to blame Cousins, but it clearly is Justin Jefferson's fault. All interceptions aren't created equally.
Oh man, we do that so much here post game on the show, Croc, because everyone's crushing somebody during the game. We're like, oh man, I don't know if that was his responsibility. I think this other guy might have been the one that screwed that up and made him look bad. Happens all the time. Yeah, happens all the time. Next, Croc, let's talk Roger Craig. We covered this earlier this offseason, talking about Hall of Fame running backs and comparing Roger Craig and Frank Gore and what Christian McCaffrey could be. I mean, Christian McCaffrey, it would help Christian McCaffrey's future Hall of Fame candidacy so much to see someone like Roger Craig, who had all that receiving ability, get the nod in the Hall of Fame. Roger Craig, among other ex-49ers, reach semifinals of 2024 Hall of Fame voting. Next. I do want to thank everybody once again for making Locked On 49ers your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We love all the everydayers out there. You can become one. All you got to do is subscribe up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. Okay, here we go. This is from Matt Mayoko. The Pro Football Hall of Fame's Coach Coordinator Committee reduced the list of candidates to 29. It was once, I think, above 60 candidates. It's down to 29 candidates. The group includes George Seifert, John McVay, Mike Holmgren, and Mike Shanahan. Only one from this category will advance to become a finalist for the 2024 class. Oh, no, I'm sorry. The 60 number, I think, is players and the coach contributor part of the committee. So this is just the coach contributors. We've got George Seifert, John McVay, Mike Holmgren, and Mike Shanahan, all of them part of 49ers lore. And man, Mike Shanahan with 2 Super Bowls. It's a little surprising that it's going to be this hard for him to get into the Hall of Fame. George Seifert had such a fantastic run with the San Francisco 49ers. And then on the player side of things, Roger Craig is part of the group of 60 total, including the seniors, coaches, contributors, and players. And let's see, the other players that are up for the semifinals, along with Roger Craig, it is Ken Anderson, Otis Anderson, Carl Banks, Maxie Bond, don't know who that is, Larry Brown, Super Bowl hero, Mark Clayton, Charlie Connerly, Roger Craig, obviously, Henry Ellard, who seemed like his best games always against the 49ers, Randy Gradishar, Lester Hayes, Chris Hinton, Cecil Isbell, Joe Jacoby, Billy White Shoes Johnson, Mike Ken, Bob Kuchenberg, George Kuntz, Albert Lewis, Jim Marshall, Clay Matthews Jr., Steve McMichael, Eddie Meter, Stanley Morgan, Tom Nobis, Art Powell, Sterling Sharp, Steve Tasker, Otis Taylor, Everson Walls, and Al Wistert. Those are the semifinalists. Each semifinalist last played the game of professional football no later than 1998. So it's the pre-1998, the pre-2000s crowd is what we're talking about here, that have a chance to get in from the Hall's 12-person seniors committee. I like Roger Craig's chances against those guys, but and that's just at the semifinals level right now. I'm still not. I would love to be pleasantly surprised, Croc, but I just feel like Roger Craig's not going to get in, even this time.
It's going to be tough. Man, but one name I heard on that list, where I'm like, man, he's not in the Hall of Fame. Sterling Sharp. And I know his career got cut short due to injury, but he was up there with Jerry Rice, right, as like one of the best receivers in the league. Now, you got Jerry Rice at number 1. Sterling Sharp wasn't too far behind. And we're talking about the greatest receiver of all time. And then he had the neck injury, and it just cut his career short. But he was a really good football player. So it's just interesting to kind of hear his name. But as it pertains to Roger Craig, I think the tough thing for him, too, is, Adrian Peterson. He just retired. And it's like, and maybe one has nothing to do with the other because of, like you said, kind of the pre-1998 guys. But do they let Roger Craig in before Adrian Peterson? And I mean, they're in 2 different classes of like running back. So like when I think of Hall of Fame, I think of Adrian Peterson. When I think of Hall of Really Good, I think of Roger Craig.
Well, yeah. So do they start to give Craig more credit for his receiving ability and being the first 1,000 yard guy? And do they not just count rushing yards for what he was able to do? And I think that's something going forward that, a lot of running backs are going to have to get credit for, or else a lot of them aren't going to be able to get into the Hall of Fame if we're just adding up rushing yards. But It's a different committee and a different process too for those senior committee guys like Roger Craig and the regular voting that goes on for someone like Adrian Peterson. So I don't think they're related, but I think that the more guys with the more yards that go in, the harder it is for someone like Roger Craig's numbers to stack up. By the way, so Sterling Sharpe that you mentioned, he only played from 1988 to 1994, so 7 years. He made 5 Pro Bowls in those 7 years, 3 first-team All-Pros in those 7 years, and let's see, he had 18 touchdowns in his final season too, which is still third best in league history, behind Jerry Rice's 22 in a shortened season. By the way, wasn't it? Wasn't Jerry Rice's 22 touchdowns in a shortened season? In his career totals in 7 years, 8,134 yards and 65 touchdowns. So he just dominated for that short time.
I mean, we're 7 years, 65 touchdowns. If I'm not mistaken, that's more than Michael Irvin, who is in the Hall of Fame.
Entire career?
Yeah, his entire career.
And wasn't he the touchdown maker? No, he was the playmaker.
The playmaker.
Who was the touchdown maker? Stephen Baker? No. Somebody Baker was the touchdown maker.
Oh no, only Baker that we acknowledge is Dusty Baker.
Dusty finally got his Super Bowl. By the way, Roger Craig. Craig, first player in the NFL history to have 1,000 yards rushing, 1,000 yards receiving in the same season. Won 3 Super Bowls with the 49ers. Spent 8 seasons with the Niners, 83 to 90. 1 with the Raiders in 91, and 2 with the Minnesota Vikings, totaling 13,100 yards from scrimmage and scored 73 touchdowns. It looks better when you count his scrimmage yards and not just his rushing yards. So we'll see. We'll see if Roger Craig is able to get in. If he didn't do it a lot in his 30s, as we talked about. And I think that's one of the keys in getting into the Hall of Fame. And we've seen it with Roger Craig. We've seen it with Sterling Sharpe. We see it with a lot of guys. And it's what's made it difficult on players like Patrick Willis. I think Willis will get in eventually, and I think Roger Craig won't. That's the way I feel. I hope I'm wrong about that with Roger Craig.
By the way, Michael Irvin, 65 touchdowns on the dot. So the same amount of touchdowns as Sterling Sharpe. And he said Sterling Sharpe, what was his first year?
88 to 94.
Interesting. They actually came out of college the same exact year.
And Irvin played till like 2000, didn't he?
To 99, and then he had to get carted off the field, and I remember that against the Philadelphia Eagles, I believe. But played several more years and had his best season, 10 touchdowns, and it's like, man, you look at what our guy Sterling Sharpe was doing. I mean, because up until that point, Sterling Sharpe was the better football player. It looks like Irvin maybe had 1 All-Pro year. Yep, 1,500 yards, 8 touchdowns. But up until 94, he had 4 Pro Bowls and 1 All-Pro. And that doesn't stack up to what Sterling Sharpe was doing either.
Nope.
Not even close. He was balling, though. He had a lot of yards.
Of all the people we've talked about, the modern era guys, Patrick Willis and them, the senior committee guys, Roger Craig, all the coaches we talked about, who do you think is the most likely to get out of all that group?
Probably Mike Shanahan. They haven't factored in, like, obviously, I mean, he was a coordinator for the 49ers, big time, winning. Then you go and, you get John Elway, to the suit. I say, because, I mean, it was an older version of John Elway. It wasn't.
He couldn't win without Shanahan. He didn't win until Shanahan got there. But he had a long career.
So, you get the older version and you get him over that hump. And, I mean, you win 2 Super Bowls. It's like, you can't. They must be holding against him his Washington days or something. No, he was trash.
And, like, listening to this Play Callers podcast, too, and knowing that Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay and Matt LaFleur and Mike McDaniel, they're all on the same staff under Mike Shanahan, and how Shanahan's legacy kind of keeps going with all these coaches, and all these guys under him end up being NFL head coaches, and all the innovation that happened. Does that strengthen Mike Shanahan? Like, so players, when they're done playing, their stats don't grow. But I feel like Mike Shanahan's case to be a Hall of Fame guy keeps growing with all of the coaches, his assistants, that continue to do great things.
Right, between them and like the Kubiaks, but it's like, hey, look at what I did when I coached.
Mm-hmm.
Super Bowls, all that. You know, one of the most explosive offenses with the 49ers put up what 55. Wasn't he the coordinator when in that last Super Bowl win?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, you see what the 49ers did, and then I go and win 2 more, and then now you have all my little mini-me's running around, and they have adjusted, and they've, we saw my Sean McVay, how he didn't want Cooper Kupp on the sideline, so he went to 11 personnel, but had that third receiver do certain things. I really like how they adopted more of a tempo offense for Jared Goff, because they felt like he played better, like faster. Like if they get a nice play, they like to get on the ball and then go again, and that's when he was most comfortable, as opposed to coming out of the huddle and stuff. So that was interesting to hear. But yeah, they have kind of tweaked and adjusted some of the things, but I think at its core, it probably has a lot of the same concepts that they've learned from Shanahan. So like basically when they do their base install of kind of what the offense is, it probably starts with a lot of the traditional stuff from Mike Shanahan, and then they kind of build off of that.
I always forget about the Raiders portion of Shanahan's career as well. Before he went Broncos, so he was with Elway twice. He was the Broncos offensive coordinator in 85 to 87, then was head coach with the Raiders, then went back to Denver again. So he had 3 stints with the Broncos and quarterbacks, offensive coordinator. So he was Elway a lot, and then came to the Niners as offensive coordinator, won the Super Bowl, then got the head coach job in Denver. It's wild. I think 2 rings. He's had a long career, head coach multiple teams. I think probably the way it ended weird in Washington hurt him for a long time, but we'll see if his legacy continues on with the coaches that were his assistants in Washington, now doing big things, and if he'll get a little bit more credit with the voters for that.
I feel like it ends weird for a lot of guys. I mean, it's like you can't hold, some down years late and just erase everything he did, like as a coach, and the impact he's had on the NFL and offense.
Yeah, it's crazy because someone like Sean Payton could have not taken the Broncos job and probably gotten into the Hall of Fame. And maybe the Broncos job will help him get there. But if he's bad, maybe it could hurt his chances.
Right. You only won 1 Super Bowl. You had Drew Brees, one of the best quarterbacks ever, and you only won 1 Super Bowl.
It's the same Mike Shanahan argument. And Mike Shanahan, if he retired and never went to Washington, he might already be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Interesting stuff there. I heard that whole thing with RG3. That was
right. Yeah.
That was a great listen where
he loved the Shanahans. I wasn't sure how he's going to feel about that era, but it seemed like he really liked the Shanahans.
I don't know. I think that RG3 is really good at speaking. He does a terrific job on television. And I think he was keeping it strictly football there with the different things that they did to kind of make him feel comfortable and, be able to play well. And he's solely speaking on that. Because if you ask him, how do you feel about Kyle and those guys? If you ask like a different question that maybe won't be so football specific, the answer would be a lot different than how he comes off talking about their football minds.
Mm-hmm. And we do have to go, but real quick, he did say that he wished someone would save him from himself because he was playing injured, and you can't allow players that are injured to make that choice, because most times they will go out there and play and they could do more damage to themselves, which is what he did.
Yeah, and he talked about not wanting to let the guys down in the locker room.
Yeah.
The guys that have been there for a while and deserve a shot.
London Fletcher.
To win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody, for making Locked On 49ers your first listen every day. Back tomorrow. Going live. Talk to you then. Right here. Locked On 49ers.
Subscribe to this video.